Dewey is representative not only of pragmatism, which is basically a method of dealing with philosophical and other questions, but he's also representative of what I like to call evolutionary naturalism. That is to say, he's a philosophical naturalist. Everything is explicable in terms of physical processes. But the kind of naturalism he espouses is very much informed by Darwin's theory of natural selection. This evolutionary naturalism of his is a step from the evolutionary idealism in which he began philosophically. Evolutionary idealism. With the notion of historical process unfolding to more and more complex forms of life, physical, social, cultural, to more and more concrete experience. Now, in this evolutionary naturalism of his, you find these three key concepts which I think will help you to see very quickly what he's doing in the various topics he tackles in his philosophical writings. And of course he tackles pretty well all of these just in Reconstruction, the book you're reading. His concept of experience, first of all, is much closer to the concept you find in Whitehead and James than it is to the concept of experience in John Locke. So Whitehead, James, Dewey, they're three of a kind, to a certain extent. Experience includes affective experience, the psychological, emotional. Well, that was the case with Whitehead and James. But it also includes social and cultural experience. And as you read his book, you perhaps wonder to yourself if he isn't influenced by writers in the sociology of knowledge. Because he's talking about all of the social and cultural influences in the shaping of philosophy. In fact, if Whitehead is talking about the influence of natural science on philosophy, Dewey is talking about the influence of social change on philosophy. You see? Whichever one you think of, notice how vastly different that is from Descartes' stove-heated room, in which there are no influences from outside. You see? The stove-heated room becomes symbolic of so much. The isolated individual in the privacy of his own mind, shutting out every external influence, historical or anything else. You see? Such an abstraction from life. Well, concrete experience then is a very, very broad sort of thing. He speaks of fluid experience. Fluid experience. As if it's a constant flowing process of which you're hardly conscious, it's so fluid. I remember at the time I first read Dewey and came across the notion of fluid experience, I had a 46 Dodge, which had what was then called fluid drive. What was fluid drive? Well, I'm not quite sure. But it was, I think, a step towards automatic transmission. Because the change was so much smoother that you were hardly conscious of changing gear, though you still changed it manually. A fluid drive. You're hardly conscious of going from one moment or one situation to another. The one flows into the other. Fluid drive, fluid experience for Dewey. But fluid experience, which is really just a product of habit, habitual behaviors, habitual responses, is interrupted by what Dewey calls problem situations. Problem situation. And it's only problem situations which stir thought. You see, the role of intelligence, of intellect, is in the resolution of problem situations. Otherwise, you go along habitually without thinking. You know, do you think about what you're doing when you drive? Or do you just really think about what to do when you get into a problem situation? I remember driving in Seattle. And if you've ever driven in Seattle, you know there are some very steep hills with stop signs at the top. It's almost as bad as driving in some parts of San Francisco. You know, you've seen the pictures of the hill that goes round and round and round. Yeah, well, they have ones that go up straight with stop signs at the top. Now, how do you, normally behave that way if you grow up driving in flat pig country around here? Problem situation. You think of several alternatives and then do what I've done on such occasions from time to time, pull on the emergency brake and then push in the clutch and change gear. And gradually release the emergency brake, hoping that you apply enough gas to get it over the top. You know. Well, the point is that fluid experience is interrupted by problem situations which demand thought. You come up with ideas. I know what I'll do. Hey, let's try that. And so it's experimental thinking. You see, experimenting with ideas in order to resolve problems. Now, if you love looking for dialectical situations, a problem situation is a dialectical situation. There's a thesis, an antithesis, and a synthesis. The thesis is the fluid experience that is interrupted by the antithesis in a problem situation, some threatening situation. Thesis, antithesis. And what you're looking for in coming up with the right idea is a synthesis which will enable you to embrace the thesis and the antithesis and move on to the next. The synthesis becomes the thesis for the next. So the dialectic is right there. Well, intelligence then as problem solving in the course of habitual experience, which leads to his functionalist psychology. Functionalist psychology is, in simple terms, the theory that all of our mental processes, psychological processes, are simply functions of bodily need, functions of biological need. So our desires are biologically based functions of an organism that's trying to adjust to its environment, trying to respond to something in the environment. Desire. Reason is a function of the organism that has developed, reflecting on how to adjust to environment. And sometimes that reason is involved in modifying desires in the light of what you find out about the problem situation. You don't need to worry, it's going to be all right, look at that and look and look at that. You see. And growth is not a steady movement towards a fixed goal, but an ongoing evolutionary process in which various experiences are being incorporated into the ongoing experience, which is the self. Functionalist psychology. And you can look at something of that in pages 83 to 86, for instance, pages 5 and 6 early on, where he insists that we're creatures of desire rather than of intellect, basically. Functionalist psychology. Okay, and that is where you begin to see underlying all of this, the concept of experience and the psychology, his theory of natural selection. You'll find in chapter 3 he explicitly rejects any fixity of species, because he recognizes that the traditional view of fixity of species is simply an extension of Aristotle's fixed forms, fixed essences. Yeah, I think, frankly, he's right, that fixity of species is simply a continuation of an Aristotelian tradition. He rejects any real universals, and in rejecting real universals, he rejects intrinsic final causes of a fixed sort. Telos. There are no fixed ends to pursue in ethics or anything else. There are no fixed laws of thought. How we think is simply a tool for adjustment in a changing world. And the laws of thought have simply arisen as tools that have proved successful in that adjustment. So his point is then that philosophy is not pure theory. It arises in a practical context. It feeds back into a practical context. Concrete experience is its entire matrix, not theory for theory's sake. Well, those three concepts, I think, sum up what you can call, if you like, the theoretical core of Dewey's thinking. Have to be careful how you say theoretical with Dewey, but the theoretical core of his thinking. This is the grand hypothesis, which generates lesser hypotheses in regards to epistemology, philosophy of mind, etc., etc., for which he thinks there is experimental confirmation. Applications, all right, run through those. We can rather quickly. I already said that he talks of